First of all, I have put in the chat the link to the updated version of the NIST-IR, which apparently has been published yesterday after our meeting. Feel free to look at it. Today we continue, with test and validation, and we have two presentations by Jessie Clédier and by Sonny Belaid in the first part of the meeting, and afterwards we will have a panel discussion. We have invited people mainly from industry, so-called industry panel, where we will discuss everything that has been said yesterday, any views that people want to still share with us, and feel free to ask questions either on the chat or just speak up. Miro Knežević will moderate the panel, and he will introduce the panelists in the second half of the meeting. Before we start, I have prepared one slide with my reflection of the first day of the workshop. It's not exhaustive or anything, just for me the key takeaways. First, from the NIST presentation, apparently NIST would like to hear the stakeholders to say which items they would like to be standardized, and of course without hindering innovation. This track, the single device track, will be on block ciphers and mainly AES. It will consider both side channel combined and fault and side channel, so combined attacks. And mainly probably more on the side channel, because the theory is, at least this was my understanding, the theory is more developed there. But also they will look at techniques that would be also applicable to lightweight primitives, not only AES. From point of view of validation, it has been pointed out that industry needs fast validation, and they are transitioning to a fully automated system. So the hope is that this effort will actually support this automated system of validation and testing. From the academic point of view, I think we heard that we have well understood published solution for basic cases. Of course, there are corner cases which there are for now different solutions, and it's discussable which are the best ones. Also, there are different limitations, but different requirements, depending on if we could talk about hardware or software implementations, and glitches seem to be more crucial in hardware, while transitions and noise are more crucial for software implementations. And of course, we would like to have reference platforms, both on FPGA and ASIC, which include measurement setups or benchmark framework, and the academia would like to see this included in the standard. We also had two industrial speakers, and they talked about the need of different security levels for different applications. And they would like to be flexible, to have flexible tools and different techniques that they can adapt based on the application and on the trade-offs they would like to apply. Also, we have heard that the single device track from this NIST-IR should be placed into the FIPS 140 context. And the industry hopes to put a credible certification scheme, needs to put a credible certification scheme in place so that a fair play is ensured for industry players. I'm sure there are much more takeaways that everybody has made for himself or herself. And I'm sure there will be a lot of points for discussion during this day. I hope, especially during the panel. So for now, I suggest we start with the first presentation by Jessie, and I'll stop sharing my screen so that he can share his. Yes, we see it.
Okay, hello everybody.
And we hear you.
Okay, so okay, now you have it right.
Just introduce yourself first, because
Yeah.
how we do it.
Okay, so I'm Jesse Clédier, and I will make a short talk on hardware fault injection and symmetric algorithm. I work in Leti ITSF, and I will make my first point of the talk will be a brief presentation of Leti ITSF. After we spoke about introduction on fault injection, I will present you some equipment for fault injection. We will speak of what we can do on symmetric cryptography. I will give an example and a short conclusion. So I work in Leti ITSF. This ITSF is located in France, in Grenoble. It has been created in 1999, and we have inherited this activity from France Telecom ITSF, which was the oldest French ITSF. We are accredited by French INSSI for common criteria. We have a strong expertise in embedded software evaluation, side channel analysis, fault injection, and evasive attack. We are 30 people in the lab. Our domain is hardware with embedded software, security boxes, programmable logic controller. And the scheme we are accredited for is common criteria up to EAL7, EMVCO, CAST, Visa, MyFair, and FIDO. Okay, so this was for Leti ITSF. Now I will make a very short introduction on fault injection. I'm not sure how familiar you are with fault injection, but to make it brief, to make it short, fault injection is a way to corrupt the normal processing of the circuit and to make the circuit do something that it should not do. That is not that you corrupt the processing of the code that have been implemented on the circuit. For the subject we are interested today, we will speak about what we can do on cryptographic algorithm. And this part of fault injection and cryptographic algorithm is generally called differential fault analysis. And differential fault analysis is a very powerful way to retrieve some secret key of algorithm. But you have to be aware that fault injection is not only restricted to DFA. Like you can do fault injection in any code that is processing on the circuit, and it can be a very powerful way to make attacks. For example, instead of doing a DFA to get the secret key, you can maybe do to corrupt to do a memory dump and to get directly the secret key from the memory dump, doing a fault injection instead of attacking directly the cryptographic algorithm. So you have to be aware that fault injection is really not restricted to DFA. Now I will give a quick panel of what we can do on fault injection and with which equipment. On the left of my slide, I represent a circuit. It's typically a smart card circuit where you have some logic area where some processor are implemented and a crypto processor also is implemented. You have some NVM memory, typically it's EEPROM here. You have some RAM memory, some ROM memory. And the most low-cost fault injection you can do is a power glitch. A power glitch is you apply a spike on the power of the circuit. You can do it on the power or on the ground of the circuit, whatever is working better. And you apply it directly on the pad of the circuit through the package. And this it's a very easy to make. Or to do that, you can use a special generator that can be costly, but you can also do that very cheaply with a single transistor. And with that, you can manage to have some results. In the 90s, it was very successful to make attack on pay TV system with power glitches. Nowadays, security circuits are not sensitive to power glitches. They are always detected. But any circuit that is not oriented to security will be sensitive to power glitches. And when I say circuit for security, I mean smart cards. Like in the smart card industry, the level of security is very high. If you take a circuit that is oriented for security but is not coming from the smart card industry, you can be sure that it will be susceptible to power glitches. In the recent years, I think it's in 2012, there was an improvement of power glitches that was called FBBI. It has been done by University of Montpellier, and you also apply your power glitches, but instead of doing it through the pad of the circuit, you do it through the backside of the circuit, through the die of the circuit. So you just take a needle that you put on the die of the circuit, and you apply your power glitches on this needle. And you can see that with such a glitch, the perturbation, the corruption is more localized. You can apply it to a certain part of the circuit. When you do a power glitches through the pad, you apply it to the whole circuit. There's no localization at all. With FBBI, there's a bit more of focusing the corruption. Another way to do fault injection is to make electromagnetic pulse. You still do a glitch, but you do it on a coil that you put at the proximity of the circuit. And this coil is going to emit an electromagnetic pulse that is going to corrupt the circuit. So to do that, you can still use a generator, the same generator that you can use with power glitches, and you apply that to your coil. Your coil, you can do it on made easily. You can also use some electromagnetic compatibility equipment. There's some companies that do this kind of equipment to see if equipment are susceptible to electromagnetic pulse. And you can make a slight hack on this equipment to make it usable for perturbation. And you can also do some equipment yourself that will be more powerful and more accurate. And the last type of fault injection is using focus light. This is the most versatile way to corrupt a circuit. So you can do your laser bench yourself with optical elements. It's not difficult. In our lab, it's what we do. We have all our optical equipment are done by ourselves. But you can also buy this directly fully equipped by some companies. For example, Alphanov in France is doing some equipment like that. Rescure in Holland also is doing some equipment like that are typically designed for security testing. And with using focus light, it's very nice because you can apply your light that can be a very small size, like some few microns of spot diameter. And you can apply it on really where you want to corrupt your circuit. You can do it on the logic area, corrupting the processor of the circuit or the crypto processor of the circuit, or you can do it. You can apply it on the buffer memory to corrupt the reading of data that is going to be stored in this memory. It's a very nice way to corrupt the circuit, and you can manage to have very good result with focus light. It's totally the best way to corrupt a circuit nowadays. So I've presented two different means to perturb the circuits. Physical effects behind these means are different, but you have to be aware that logical effects are always kind of the same. So if you design a countermeasure to protect against a perturbation, a fault injection, this countermeasure should work whatever the perturbation means you are using. This is completely true for software countermeasure. If you are speaking of hardware countermeasure, it can depend. Generally, hardware countermeasure are designed for a type of injection. So you will have hardware countermeasure against light injection, against electromagnetic injection, against power glitch, and so on. So for hardware countermeasures, they are more restricted to a kind of injection, but software countermeasures are generally work for all kind of injection you can do. Okay, and so to finish about equipment, there's something I want to point out. There's a very important part in fault injection. It's the synchronization that you're going to use. You need to apply your injection at a perfect timing. And so you need to have a synchronization setup that is going to work on real time on your signals that you're going to get from your circuits. And also, if you are working on a security circuit, there will be some countermeasures that are going to try to self-destruct your circuit if the circuit sees that you are trying to corrupt it. And so you need to stop this self-destruction, and this synchronization setup also monitors the self-destruction in order to stop it, and in order not to damage any samples. So this is a very important part of our job, is also the synchronization of the perturbation. So now let's see quickly what we can do on symmetric cryptography. Basically, on a development that have been done by somebody that knows what he's doing, you will never see a crypto implementation without any anti-DFA countermeasure. And basically, an anti-DFA countermeasure, you can it's instead of processing one algorithm, you are going to process n algorithm, and to make a verification of the consistency of the n processing, to see if the n processing have processed the same thing. In using fault, what you can do technically is you can try to inject n time the fault to the n processing of the algorithm. This is something which we always try, because it's not obvious that you're going to have n times the same fault, and in this case the consistency will not be okay, and so the circuit will detect it. But sometimes you can manage to inject n times the same fault, and by doing it enough time, you manage to generally to do it. And also, the verification of the consistency can be corrupted. So you can apply a perturbation corruption just when the circuit is making the verification, and the circuit will not see that the consistency is not okay, and it will output a faulty result that can be used after for DFA. When you are doing code analysis, you can see all these countermeasures that are present. But when you are speaking of fault injection, it's very difficult to see if a countermeasure is going to be enough, because when you are doing fault injection, the side effect of your perturbation is very difficult to apprehend, to know what's going to happen. And it's really the testing of that is going to show if the countermeasure is enough or not. The code analysis is not enough to prove that the countermeasure is okay. The code analysis is very useful to see where you can attack the circuits, where you can attack your development, to see where there's no countermeasure and where it's a good way to attack it. But to prove that it will be enough against fault injection, it's not possible if you do testing. And also, if you want to inject n times the same fault to the processing of your n algorithm, you have to test it. You can't know by advance if it will work. So now, to finish my talk, I will present a concrete example on a circuit. It's not on an AES, but it's on a DES. It's on a command that do a CBC MAC with DES and triple DES. There's the anti-DFA on all the DES that are processed. So on the figure here, you can see the final single DES and the final triple DES. So for each algorithm, you have 4 processing that is performed. So for a genuine triple DES, to do a triple DES -1, and you are going also to do it a second time. So you have, for one triple DES, you will have 4 triple DES that are going to be processed. And also on this circuit, there were some countermeasures that are basically some able to detect and to stop. So now the result on this command. So on this figure, I have presented a zoom on just the final triple DES. So you see the 4 processing of the triple DES. And by applying 4 perturbations on the 4 triple deaths, so the first triple death, you apply at the end of the triple death because you want to DFI the output of the circuits of the algorithm. The second triple death, it's a opposite operation, so you're going to apply it at the beginning of the triple death to make the same fault, and it's the same for the 2 other triple deaths. On this command, in 12 hours, we managed to retrieve the full last key of the triple death. So on 12 hours, we managed to do like something like 50,000 execution. And during these 50,000 executions, there was 800 corruption that were the same for the 4 triple deaths, and so the consistency of the circuit of the processing was okay, and the circuit have output the faulty cryptogram. Unfortunately, on the 800 faulty ciphertexts, very few of them were different. There was only 39 different ones, but with these 39 different ones, it was way enough to get the last key of the triple deaths. And this test was done on a real smart card circuit with top-of-the-art countermeasure against fault injection. In conclusion, fault injection can be very powerful. On cryptographic implementation, this for sure, you can do DFA in a very aggressive way in order to get the key. But if you are not targeting cryptographic algorithm, you can also do very powerful attack with fault injection. And you always need to conduct tests to know if your development is enough protected against fault injection. Code analysis is not enough. Okay, that's all for what I plan to show you today.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any questions? We will use now the time for the questions for this presentation because Jesse has to leave shortly after. So please, if you have a question. Lauren says she has a question. Please ask a question, Lauren.
Yeah, I was wondering if what the speaker thinks about like physical countermeasures against faults versus algorithmic. So do you think we need a combination of both? Do you think one of the two might suffice? Yeah, what's your opinion on that?
It's a good question. To be honest, if you are a very good developer and you are and you have a very bad circuit, if you do very good software countermeasure, you will manage to protect your circuit. But you have to have a lot of knowledge of what you need to do to protect the circuit. So what you call the software countermeasure or algorithm countermeasure, I think it's the most important part. But bad circuits are not very nice to. There's a lot of ways to attack them. So it's better to use some circuits that are bomb-proof against fault injection, and so hardware countermeasure, I think it's are important. If there's no countermeasure at all, it will be very difficult to make a development that is secure enough. Even if you are a very good developer, you have to be at the top of the art of what you are doing, and it will be difficult. So I will say both countermeasures are important, but the most important one are the software countermeasure. So at the algorithm level.
Okay, thanks. And Navid also has a question. Do you want to say it or should I read it? Navid? Okay. Navid wrote in the chat, from practical point of view, is there any possibility to inject a fault on a specific bit of data path?
There's a possibility to inject a fault on a specific bit. Oh yeah, totally. On a register, you can target even on aggressive technology, like if you are using a 12 nanometer circuit. Generally, using light, you can still do a corruption on one bit on a register, for example. So yes, you can very focus your corruption to attack a single bit. the more focusing you need on the corruption, the more difficult it will be for the testing. But you can have the level of the bit corruption if you want. For sure. Using DFA technique, generally, you don't need so much accuracy on the corruption. So that's fine. But if you want to target very precise fault, sometimes you need this accuracy on the corruption.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions?
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Hi, Jesse. Thank you for the presentation. So taking as an example the attack you mentioned, where with 50,000 and something executions, you were able to recover a key. From your practical experience, let's say if this particular smart card would have a threshold circuit design, would this attack still be possible? Or do you think it would completely prevent the attack from being successful?
Oh no, the attack I've shown you is on a real smart card circuit that is not so old, like it's, I will say, 4 or 5 years old. So it's still at the top of the art of what we see in the security domain, and so no, it's if I understood well your question, no, it's not. What I've presented, you can still do it on a secure circuit. After, if you, on this example, there was four processing of the algorithm. We have shown that we can, in a reasonable time, we can manage to inject 4 times the same fault in the processing of the command. If there was 20 algorithms, I don't think we will have managed to do it. So there's of course there's a threshold value that depend on the circuits. There's some circuits that are more friendly against fault than others. Of course there's a threshold value. It's very dependable of the circuits. So I can't tell you, but generally this threshold value will vary from 2 to 10, let's say. Did I answer?
I have to be honest, I'm not fully sure I understood, but maybe I can try to follow later on. Maybe just giving it another try. The basic question is, if we implement the kind of threshold techniques that, for example, we discussed partially yesterday, would those techniques prevent the attack that you described?
Unfortunately, I was not present yesterday, so I don't know.
Sorry.
So you mean,
let's say if you have,
Luis, you mean if you have masking implemented?
Yes, for example.
Oh, masking again side channel analysis?
Yes.
Oh, side channel analysis countermeasure doesn't protect anything against DFA. Yeah. It's even the opposite. In fact, it makes more easy way to inject fault. So it's a straight implementation without countermeasure against side channel is more difficult in a way to inject fault than a countermeasure with than an implementation with side channel countermeasure, because there's more processing and it's easier to make a fault in it. So no.
So Luis, you need combined countermeasures in place in order to protect against.
But one quick question about this. So with respect to fault injections, we can consider 2 different goals. So there's the fault injection that just tries to corrupt the output. But in a scenario where we're just interested in protecting, let's say, against key recovery, the fact that we can induce a fault injection does not necessarily imply that we have the ability to recover a portion of the key. So would that still apply, Jesse, in the case where there's a threshold circuit design like masking or something? When you perform fault injections, does that allow you easily to recover bits of the key?
I will say if you output faulty result, I will say yes, but maybe I didn't understood exactly the subject of what you talked yesterday.
Okay, let's try to follow up as the workshop goes, and if need be offline.
Okay, feel free to contact me if you have any question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other question? I see another question in the chat. There are, or it's not a question. There are published DFA attacks on the last AES rounds in which a arbitrary fault in a single byte is enough. Splitting bytes into shares doesn't help against such attacks. Yes, what exactly?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah. It's completely true.
Yeah. These are two different things. Any other questions, Jesse? If not, then we move on to the next presentation. Sonia, you can share your screen.
Yeah, sure.
So the second presentation of today is by Sonia Belait from Crypto Experts, and she will talk about from type proof to tornado, automatic generation of probing secure mask implementations.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, but we don't see your screen yet.
Yeah, I had to quit for a few seconds to share my screen. Sorry.
That's fine.
Is
No.
that?
Yes. Now we see, but can you make it full screen? Yes, perfect.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I'm Sonia Belait. I'm working at Crypto Experts, and I mainly do research on side channel analysis and trying to find formal methods to automatically verify or generate side channel countermeasures. So in this talk, I wanted to talk about the automatic generation of probing secure masked bit sliced implementations. And actually, this subject we worked on in several previous works. One with Damon Goudarzi and Mathieu Rivin that was published at Asia 2 years ago. And one more recent with Pierre-Évariste Dagan, Darius Mercadier, Mathieu Rivin, and Raphaël Wintersdorf that was published at Eurocrypt this year. So in a nutshell, what I'm going to present in this talk is how to verify the security of a circuit in what we call the bit probing model. So actually we managed to do that, take a specific circuit and determine accurately if this circuit is T-probing secure or not. And this method was implemented through a tool called type proof, which is publicly available now. Then I want to talk about the extension we made about this tool and this method. Actually, we worked on the verification of circuits in what we call the register probing model, so considering full registers instead of bit. And the second method was implemented in an extension of type proof called type proof plus, which is also available. These two methods led us to build a global compiler that actually take a high-level description of a cryptographic primitive and produce a masked implementation of this primitive, which is secure either in the bit probing model or in the register probing model. So this tool is Tornado. Well, we'll talk a bit about it also. And finally, I'm going to give some benchmarks on masked-friendly NIST lightweight schemes. So that are lightweight schemes that were submitted at the NIST competition that are either claimed to be mask-friendly or that we think are mask-friendly. So we'll present some benchmarks of Tornado and Type Proof Plus on these schemes. So first of all, so we already discussed these notions yesterday actually, so I'm gonna be quick on that. But to protect software implementations, we usually use the countermeasure masking. So very basically, we take every sensitive variable x, and we split this variable into t+1 shares, here x0 to xt. So we have a sharing of x. Such that T shares are generated uniformly at random. And the last one is computed so that the combination of the T+1 shares, according to some law, is equal to the sensitive variable X. So when we have XOR, it's called Boolean masking, actually. So given the leakage model that we talked about yesterday with François-Xavier, masking makes sense when we have actually noisy values of intermediate variables as an adversary, because it was shown in 2 decades ago actually that combining noisy values is very difficult. So the more values we have to combine, the more difficult is the attack. So that's why we have T+1 shares here. And there is actually a model introduced by Ishai and Wagner that is called T-probing model, which captures this difficulty. And actually it says that a circuit is T-probing secure if any set of T intermediate variables is independent from the secret. So when you look at the sharing, it's quite easy to say that if we take T shares only at most, then you won't have any information on the secret. However, it's much more difficult when we have to do all the computations that are required within a circuit. So if you want to do additions between sharings, multiplications, and other operations, it starts to be very complicated to ensure. And actually, the community worked a lot on proving T-probing security for what we call gadgets that are small masked operations. So we have additions that are T-probing secure, we have multiplications that are T-probing secure. But until recently, the main difficulty was to combine all these gadgets and to have something globally T-probing secure. So to illustrate a bit what I just said, if you look at the first figure on the left, circuit 1, you have actually 2 input sharings, x1 and x2. And these 2 input sharings are added with, let's say, a sharewise additions. So the first share of x1 is added to the first share of x2 and so on and so forth. And then we can consider to have a T-probing secure multiplication, like the one that was introduced by Ishai and Wagner and extended by Riva and Proof later. So you have all the operations in this circuit that are T-probing secure, but the main difficulty is actually to determine whether the combination, the whole circuit is itself T-probing secure. In the literature, we had such examples of combination of T-probing secure gadgets that were actually not T-probing secure globally at the end. So in 2016, with Bart and my other co-authors, we came with a set of composition properties. So given a set of gadgets with some properties, T-probing security at least, but also stronger properties with respect to side-channel analysis, we were able to build a secure composition. So the method actually consists in adding what we call refreshing gadgets at carefully chosen locations to ensure that the whole circuit was actually T-probing secure. So this method worked actually pretty well, and in a nutshell, the idea was to insert refresh gadgets each time we had such a cycle here. But the thing that we noticed later that the method, the compositional properties, and the method that was implemented in a tool called MaskComp is actually over-conservative, in the sense that sometimes we insert refreshing gadgets that are here to add randomness to the shares that are not needed to ensure T probing security. This is not very good for efficiency, since refreshing gadgets ask for a lot of randomness and also extra operations. So what we tried to do in 2018 was to determine an accurate method, an exact method to say if a circuit is T-probing secure or not. And actually, if we go back to circuit 1, it's actually with an addition, a pairwise addition and the ISW multiplication, it's actually T-probing secure without any refreshing gadget. So this is the method of what we call the type proof. So the method we came up with apply to what we call tight shared circuits. So namely a circuit with variables that are split into T+1 shares for T-probing security, and that are exclusively made of pairwise additions, ISW multiplications, and ISW refresh gadgets. There are just multiplication, ISW multiplication by 1. And it applies on circuits implemented on GF2. So how the method is working, actually we started from the T-probing security, how to determine if the circuit is T-probing secure, and we managed to simplify this problem of determining the probing security of circuit to a simplified problem that I will expose in the next slides. Then we managed to resolve this simplified problem, and we were then able to extend the solution to larger circuits. So here you have the example of a circuit with 3 input sharings, addition, multiplications, and refresh gadgets. So the main goal here is to say whether or not exactly this circuit is T-probing secure for any T, or if there exists an attack for some T. So the first step that we made was to show that actually this security game is equivalent to another one where the adversary is restricted to probe only external variables. Namely, the adversary is not able to make observation within a multiplication or within a refresh gadget, but only on the inputs and outputs of these operations. And actually, we proved that it's actually equivalent to the T-probing security. The initial circuit is T-probing secure, is equivalent to this circuit is T-probing secure with this restriction for the adversary. And that works because we consider only refreshing and multiplication gadgets that are S and I, which is a stronger property claiming some kind of independence between observation on the input and on the output and on the inputs. Then we made another step forward to say that actually proving the T-probing security of the initial circuit is equivalent to proving the T-probing security of this flattened circuit. It's actually the initial circuit where each output of multiplication or refreshing gadget is replaced by a fresh input sharing here. So this is still equivalent with the same restriction on internal variables to game 1 and game 0. So here, the adversary is only able to probe the external variables, input of multiplications, input output of the addition, and input of refreshing gadgets. This step actually works because since the adversary is not allowed to probe the internal variables anymore, there is some kind of independence between inputs and outputs of multiplications and refreshing gadgets. And the final steps that we proved is that instead of allowing the adversary to prove anywhere on the external variables, we can restrict him to only probe the inputs of the multiplications. So basically, for the cost of one observation, the adversary can have 2 inputs, a pair of inputs of the multiplication. And having the probing security on this circuit with these restrictions is totally equivalent to having the T-probing security on the initial circuit with no restriction at all. when we got to game 3, it's actually easier to have a security proof. Namely, we have all the probes that are inputs of the multiplication, and they can be all seen as linear combinations of the input coordinates. So each probe actually depends on input shares, on different input shares. And the probes can thus be distributed into T+1 matrices for the T+1 shares that we refer to as M0, M1 to MT. And we actually showed that the T-probing security is equivalent to proving that the intersection of the matrices images is empty. So actually, if it's not empty, it's easy to derive a concrete probing attack on the initial circuits. So now that we explain a bit theoretically this method, this can be perfectly implemented into a tool that what we did with type-proof that is available online. We can actually go through every multiplication in the flattened circuit to solve this last problem and show that the intersection of the images is empty. I will show some benchmark on that at the end. So once we had that, we wanted to extend the method to be able to verify circuits that are not on GF2 anymore, but considering not only bits, but also registers. So basically, so far we considered bit probing model, which is actually, we have one probe of one observation, which gives the attacker 1 bit. In software, we manipulate intermediate variables in registers. So what we wanted to have is to achieve security when one probe or one observation is actually a full register of m bits. So this changes a bit the verification, and I will explain quickly how. The first thing is that we have to consider more gadgets, to consider implementations that manipulate directly registers. So we have the same gadgets as before, multiplication, refreshing, and addition, but we also want to consider shareWise multiplication by a constant, shareWise addition with a constant, shareWise left shift, right shift, and rotation gadgets as well. So what does it change concretely on our sequence of games, on the reduction of our problem? Well, fortunately, it doesn't change much actually, because we can still go through every game and show its equivalent with the first one. We can restrict the adversary to probe only external variables, because we still have gadgets, multiplication and refresh gadgets that are SNI, which are strong in the register probing model. We only have a few more shareWise gadgets, more than the addition. We have the shifts and rotations, but it actually works the same. We can still flatten the circuit to have an equivalent circuit of multiplicative depth 1. It still works the same. The proof is a bit different, but the main ideas are similar. And we can still restrict the adversary to probe only the multiplication inputs. I'm not sure I specified that in the previous slide, but this is because we have the ISW multiplication starts with subproducts of shares at the beginning. So we can still have this restriction, and all the proofs can be adapted for registers. So we come up with actually a very similar linear algebra problem. The only difference is that the matrices are of higher dimensions, because we have to consider the register size. The observations are not made of 1 bit anymore, but they are made of up to m bits. So the matrices are a bit larger. And we can still implement this method within a tool that we call type-proof by looking at each multiplication separately and considering the span of the operands to check for an attack and achieve the same kind of results. So let me give you a small example to show you a bit how this method works in practice. So here we took an implementation of Gimli Cipher. So this implementation comes from the tool that we will present just after, which is Tornado. So there are probably several ways to implement Gimli, but we chose this one, and we extract some operations within Gimli. So here we have a circuit on 32-bit registers with 5 input sharings from I1 to I5. We consider 2 multiplication, G1 and G2, and we have some rotations, left shifts, addition, and rotations. So here, if we want to determine so here we can determine that we have actually an attack on the circuit in the T-probing model. So how does it work? So we look actually at the 2 multiplications because this is where the adversary is allowed to probe. So if we allow the adversary to make a first probe on the first multiplication, remember that one observation gives the adversary 2 inputs because the input shares are first multiplied together at the beginning of the multiplication. So if he makes 1 probe in the multiplication, he can choose to have the share 0 of x here on this branch and the share 1 of y on this one. And you can choose to only get the 32nd bits of each register, okay? So from 1 probe, the adversary can have these 2 values. Then if we allow the adversary to make a second probe on the second multiplication, then it can have an input on both sides. So if we consider first the right side, actually, the right side depends on I2, I4, and I5. But if the adversary is only interested in the 32nd bit of the register, it will neglect I4 and I5 because we have shifts here on the left. So the 32nd bit is actually 0. So from the right side of G2, the adversary will get a share of X for the 32nd bit. So we'll choose, for instance, the share 2 of X. And from the left side, the left operand depends actually on I1, I2, and I3. But since I3 is left shifted as well, and the adversary is interested in the 32nd bit, then we can consider only I1 and I2 here. And from this side, he can choose to get the first share. So he obtains X, the 32nd bit, and the first share, so Y, 32nd bit, and the first share. So if we reassemble all this, so we have the 0 share of X32, the second share of X32, and the first share by addition of X32. So with 2 probes, the adversary is able to have 3 shares of X, which means that there is actually an attack from T equal 2. So the tool will automatically detect such attacks or determine if the circuit is T-probing secure for every T. So based on these 2 tools and on another tool called Uzuba, we actually built a global tool that we called Tornado, which takes as input a high-level specification of a cryptographic primitive. Here we took Ascon, for example, and which produces a masked implementation in assembly of this primitive that is secure either in the bit probing model or in the register probing model. So I will explain briefly how Tornado works. So Tornado is based on the compiler called Uzuba, a high-level description of a primitive, which outputs a bit sliced or an length sliced implementation of this primitive. So the idea is to separate the operations to only have operations on bits that can be gathered again with the n-sliced implementation to optimize the efficiency of the circuit and parallelize the operations on bits. So the first step from this high-level primitive is to code usuba to produce either a bit slice or an n-slice verification. Then the implementation that results from that is given to type proof, which will analyze if the description will be still probing secure in the bit or the register probing model or not. So basically, each operation is considered as a masked operation, and the verifications that I exposed before is performed to establish whether the implementation requires to add refreshing gadgets or not. In this case, we can see that the type proof plus required to add refresh gadgets at some locations. So once this is done, the code is back to usuba, and the next step is to properly mask it. So all these operations are masked for some number of shares, we call MDS here. And then we have some optimizations, namely we gather some loops to improve the efficiency of the circuit. After that, we have more steps, transpolations and register allocation to produce at the end an assembly code that implements the initial circuit efficiently and in a way that it's T-probing secure in the chosen model is a bit T-probing secure or register probing secure. Let me now give you some benchmarks on these tools. So first, considering only type proof plus, we took actually some primitives of the NIST lightweight competitions that we think are mask friendly, because they claim that they are, because they are implemented in such a way that we think they are. And we tried to, so we generated the bit slice or the n slice implementation using usuba of these primitives, and we verified them in the bit probing model or in the register probing model. So all the bit slice implementation that we obtained were directly secure in the bit probing model, which means that no refreshing gadget was needed at all to ensure the T-probing security of these implementations. In the register probing model for different size of registers, when it was possible from the implementation, some primitive required the addition of some refreshing gadgets to be register probing secure. So I want to insist here on the fact that the implementation we came up with are from the result of usuba tool, but potentially with different implementations, we wouldn't need the refresh gadgets. Another point is that you can see the time of the verification for each mode, and it's not linear, because you can see on Spongeon, for instance, you have 1 run here in 6 seconds and 10 runs in 20 minutes. It's not linear because it really depends on the structure of the circuit. If you have a circuit which clear layers of multiplications, then you can cut the circuit with the simplification I showed you in the game to separate the verification between each part. It's not always possible, because if you have dependency and you cannot cut with a clear layer of multiplication, then the verification cannot be separated and it's going to take much more time. The other benchmark that I wanted to show you is on Tornado globally. So we took some of the primitives and we tried to display the number of cycles on our machine that we got given the masking order. So you can see the evolution of the different primitives with the implementation produced by Tornado on the different masking order. And some fact that we can notice is that, for instance, PyjaMask, which is not very competitive with when no masking is implemented, becomes competitive as the masking order grows. So some primitives are actually well done for the masking point of view, for masked implementations. And that's the end of my talk. So the tool is available online, the different ones and the global one, which is called Tornado. And don't hesitate if you have any question.
Thank you, Sonia. Any questions, please?
Pose a question?
Yes.
Hi, Sonia.
Hi.
Thank you for the presentation. Is masking friendliness a property just of the Boolean circuit, and is it something like it just depends on the multiplicative depth, or does it depend on something more refined?
Actually, it's not restricting to Boolean circuits, but it's quite hard to find the good criteria to define if a circuit is mask friendly or not. So the multiplicative depth is certainly one criteria. So for instance, if you look at famous block ciphers like the AES, we try to have the less multiplication when we do Boolean masking as possible, because they are the more expensive operations to mask. So in that case, it can be a criteria to have less multiplications. Then if you take the verification of type proof, it's interesting to have clear layers of multiplication on your circuits to split actually the verification of its security. Yeah, that's the two criteria I think about.
So basically, number of multiplications and the depth of multiplications.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. If you consider Boolean masking, because you can also consider other types of masking like multiplicative masking, and then in that case, the multiplication are not the prohibitive parts of the security, of the implementation anymore.
Are those other types of masking useful in practice?
Yeah, I
used
think
in practice?
actually they are less studied than Boolean masking, but there are some recent work on multiplicative masking that demonstrate that it actually can be efficient in practice, either on small orders when you split sensitive variables into two shares, for instance, or on generic orders T, like I presented in this talk.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Lauren has put some link in the chat for Luis related to your question.
Oh, okay, thank you. I guess maybe there's another related question, which is, so it looks like the methods shown, if I understood correctly, they require one register per layer of multiplication. By the way, I wasn't sure if multiplication was at the end level, like Boolean, or if it can also just be like a finite field multiplication. But would it be true that the latency of the circuits will necessarily be proportional to the multiplicative depth, given that one needs to put one register per multiplicative layer?
Actually, yeah, I should have been more accurate on this point, but this verification is not actually like the one presented on hardware circuits, where you consider glitches and you have to add synchronization points that are registers to make barriers to observations actually. So the model is a bit more simple, the probing model, compared to what we call generally the probing model with glitches, where we insert refresh gadgets, because not refresh gadget, sorry, registers to stop the propagation of the observations. So here actually we did not study whether it would take a register per step. Maybe it would take a register between each operation. It's not clear, but for sure the verification would be a bit different if we would be in this model.
Okay.
The point is that we just consider that one observation can be made on a full register, namely the adversary gets the full content of a register when he observes a variable. But yeah, it's not clear whether we need to store the variables at intermediate steps or not.
Okay. Thank you for the answers.
You're welcome.
Any more questions?
Maybe one question. Tornado is working on bit slicing. Is it also doing share slicing, or it's not related to it?
What do you mean by share slicing?
I'm referring to a publication by Oswald, and which is share slicing friends or full, where they named this kind of bit slicing, specific bit slicing, share slicing.
I don't know if it's quite related, but yeah, actually there are several techniques to do bit slice. So for bit slice, you split the variables into bits to have these operations directly on bit. And for end slice, you gather some different bits into the same registers to improve the efficiency and have parallelization. But I don't know if it's close to what was done in the paper.
Okay, maybe if you can check, I'll be curious just to understand if they're a relation or not.
Okay.
If I may clarify, as far as I know, Tornado is able to do share slicing as well as bit slicing. Where share slicing means basically putting all the different bits of the same register. We are putting different bits that are like shares of different bit of states of block cipher.
Okay. Okay, if you are doing also that, because in this paper they raise some questions for checking independence of assumptions. I'm curious how you deal with that situation there.
Yeah, sure. It's more detailed.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, you need to take your time maybe to see how this paper relates, but.
Yeah.
Any other questions, Sonia? If not, I suggest we take a break until 3:30 when we have the panel starting. And we resume in about 17 minutes or so.
Okay.
We can resume. I suggest we start with, Miro will start with presenting the members of the panel. But I don't see him in the call. Ah, yes, he is.
Hi.
Hey, Emir. Yes.
I said so. Should we wait for maybe 1 more minute?
Yes.
Okay.
No problem.
Okay, so maybe we can start already. So welcome back. Now on the program we have the panel session for the day 2. As you can see here, the list of panelists we have today: Sonia Belaid, we have Simon Horder from Rambus, we have Amir from Bochum, Venci from NXP, and Ruggero Susella from ST. And of course, everyone here invited in this call is also very welcome to contribute to the discussion. So please feel free to join us and discuss the questions we'll be raising. Maybe just before we start, we can do a quick round of introduction. I know Sonia already just gave her presentation, but maybe for people who joined in the meantime, and for those who were not there yesterday, maybe we just make a quick round. Sonia?
Yeah, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm Sonia Belaid. I'm working for the company Crypto Experts in Paris, France. And my main research interests are side channel analysis and countermeasures, and especially looking for my methods to verify automatically or generate automatically countermeasures.
Thank you. Simon?
Hi, I'm Simon Harder. My background is I did IT security studies in Bochum, then did my PhD with Elizabeth Oswald and Dan Page in Bristol. And then I joined Inside Secure, a smart card company, as security analyst, and essentially stayed with that business, except the smart card business disappeared. White boxes came around, then IP cores, hardware IP cores, and that got finally sold off to Rambus. And I've been trying to break them all this time.
Thank you, Simon. Amir?
Yes, hello, I'm Amir Moradi, working in the areas of hardware security in both specs, destructive and also constructive specs of hardware security, and I'm in Ruhr-Universität Bochum.
Thanks, Amir. Venci?
My name is Venci Nikov. I have been at Philips NXP for the last 17 years, working in the research and what is now called innovation organization, working on various security-related and architecture-related topics, including side channel fault attacks, protection of accelerators.
Thank you, Venci. And Ruggero?
So, hello everybody. My name is Ruggero Susella. I work in ST Microelectronics in a security R&D team. And our main role in the company is to provide our product division with security support, which comes from, let's say, architecture definition up to providing software and hardware cryptographic IP, both without and with side channel for countermeasure.
Thank you, Ruggero. And so now the 50 participants. Okay, so just joking. Basically, okay, so my name is Miroslav Knežević, so maybe a quick introduction as well. I obtained my Master's of Science degree in electrical engineering in University of Belgrade, and then I came to Belgium to study at COSEC in Leuven, where I obtained my PhD. Right after that, I joined NXP, and I spent about, I think, 7.5 or 8 years also working at NXP in Belgium. And February last year, I moved I relocated to NXP in Austin, in Texas. So I have, so my role is security architect, and I have also been involved in back in history in design some of the kind of side channel fault countermeasures. Most recently, I'm working on the design of secure microcontrollers and security architecture of SoC system on chip, particularly focused on low-cost microcontrollers. All right, so then moving ahead, I'll just I'm sorry. Oh yeah, there we go. So basically how we wanted to kind of drive this panel, basically I just, looked from all the presentations given yesterday, try to kind of write down all the open questions that presenters gave to all of us. And as you can see also today's panel will be pretty much biased towards the industry view. I mean, we only have Amir from academia, but we'll try to kind of correct this tomorrow because we have we'll have kind of the opposite, right? And then some of these questions we can also rediscuss tomorrow as well. As I said, everyone here is a participant, so please, if you see that there's something that you would really like to discuss and it's not being addressed in our discussion, just throw it out there. Maybe you can type the question in the chat screen, or again, just unmute yourself and feel free to ask. So when I was listening to the presentations yesterday and then reviewing them offline, I was kind of trying to group them in slightly higher level kind of topics. And here at the end, the list I came up with pretty much looked like something dealing with on my daily job is basically when designing a new system or a new SoC or a new microcontroller. These are typically the questions that we have to answer. So, I mean, today we can all play that role of the security architect and then maybe discuss some of these aspects. And I think it will be fun. So the very first question will be about the gadgets, and actually it's not really the typical question that we start with. We typically start with the assets, right? So trying to define what assets are we trying to protect on the device. Then what is the adversary we are protecting against? What kind of countermeasures we want to add, and then at the end, what sort of validation and certification is very important topic to be considered. And then for the very end, if we have time, this is like a small dessert topic related to randomness and how we can pick good randomness for masking. So with that, I'll move to the next slide. Basically, the form will be like this, just a couple of notes, and then I'll be maybe making some small introduction to each of the topics, and then give the word to the panelists. So as the title of this workshop is, right, we are basically also mentioning the single device is in the title, and I wanted to give you maybe a little bit more information and background on the meaning of this single device, at least from my own understanding. And we can think of this as I don't know, our smartwatch or mobile phone or a tablet or I don't know, insulin pump or Amazon Echo smart speaker sort of thing. So different type of devices that we are building. And when we look at the, let's say, life cycle of this device or lifetime, typically silicon manufacturers. So in this case, here we have today ST, we have Rambus, we have NXP, we have Infineon, Intel. So we all produce different sort of silicon components, whether they are processors or microcontrollers. We then sell them to our customers, which we typically call original equipment manufacturers, so OEMs in short. These will be companies like Microsoft or Apple or Google or Amazon. And then they will be collecting a lot of these multiple, silicon components and then integrating them and then installing their keys, their assets, installing their firmware, their software, and then basically selling them to the end user, so to us, right, normal people. And then when we look into every of these devices, I mean, typically we try to understand what are those assets that we want to protect, right? So very important is to protect the end user's privacy and personal information stored on that device. It's basically probably the most important asset we have to deal with. Then we also have the intellectual property, right, which comes in different sorts, like I mentioned OEMs, again, big companies, not always big companies, but let's say Apple or Google or Microsoft, they want to protect their code. and then the software, the firmware, and then also the silicon manufacturers. We typically also like to protect some of our intellectual property, whether we keep that in the form of crypto libraries stored in ROM, or we have that, you know, some sort of special countermeasures implemented in hardware, or we have some, I don't know, machine learning models, whatever, right? So these are the sort of assets that are present on the device. And so to understand what this is like, our typical, the first goal is to understand what is that we need to protect. And then once the device is sold to the OEMs from the silicon manufacturer, then OEMs will start installing, you know, as I said already, their keys and then their firmware, and finally be selling these devices out in the field to the end users. So one of the most important requirement from the OEMs when they speak to silicon manufacturers is that we need to enable them or ensure that it is only their signed code that can be executed on that device. It's you know what they mean by some sort of device integrity, and this is something that Simon and Venci touched upon yesterday, and I like the topic, so I wanted to also bring it out here, because in the workshop here we are mostly focusing on crypto primitives, and in this particular context more very much putting focus on the block ciphers. But you know, from the moment when we switch on this device, what starts happening there is very critical. I mean, we try to ensure that the device is secure, its integrity is maintained, meaning the firmware or the software running on it is properly authenticated and checked. And it's not only about, you know, getting hold of the keys and exploiting those keys and then doing something with them, but it's also about controlling those keys, because, you know, I do not need necessarily to know the key to be able to sign a specific message or to be able to decrypt a specific message. For me, it's sufficient if I just can control that key, right? So if I can get control over the device by making it execute some rogue code, as an attacker, I'm pretty much done, right? So this is something I wanted also to kind of bring it up here, because when you speak about about gadgets that we want to protect on the device, as Vincent also presented yesterday, you know, we can start from the very small logic, like atomic gates, like AND or XOR gates, and we can probably build anything just starting from there. We can go a level higher and start building some simple finite field multipliers, maybe even go to some smaller, simpler S boxes. But then the question is, do we want to do more than that? I mean, do we want to kind of, you know, some sort of logic that is involved in security, you know, security critical decision making? Because if we go back and we speak about the firmware verification or software verification, there's this whole, you know, heavy crypto process involved in checking the signature, but at the end it all comes down to kind of, you know, if then else. So how do we protect this? Should this be a gadget on its own, or should we look deeper and protect some of these aspects that are not necessarily crypto related, but are very much related to security? And there are plenty of these, like, as I said, firmware authentication or debug authentication and so on. And another aspect here will be, as also mentioned by several people yesterday, including Venci, is basically composition, right? So if you have these multiple gadgets, how do we compose them? And we should also be always keeping in mind, you know, making modular designs. So if we have simple gates, how do we build more complex circuits out of those? So this is, I think, the very first question. So I leave it there for the panelists. So maybe Simon, if you want to start, because you were also discussing this pretty well yesterday, and then other people can also pick it up.
Yeah, okay, so I believe that if you're, you need to have a homogeneous level of security. So if you've got a really secure AES core, but you don't secure the rest of the device to the same level, people are not going to buy your device. There is like, they will say, well, there's all the other attacks possible, and your AES security doesn't buy me anything. It just costs me area space, it costs me time. why would I pay for that if the rest of the device is not equally secure? So yes, I believe we need to have this bigger picture of device security, and knowing that the correct firmware runs on the device is one of the biggest issues. So if I, for example, go for a really high value device, an electronic voting device, I don't care about the secrecy of the firmware so much. Maybe the firmware is even open source so that everyone can review it. But I really want to make sure that the correct firmware is running on that device, because otherwise my vote is not going to count. And that's something, if we're talking about protecting AES, we don't have any integrity protection so far. So that would be really concerning.
Thank you, Simon. Anyone else?
Okay, I do agree and align with your thoughts so far about to put this in context that you need to have equal security over all components. Otherwise, it makes little sense to make one bulletproof while the others are weaker. And in that sense, maybe the most essential example is what you said in the beginning, that when you verify integrity, for example, and then it boils down to if then else question. And then how we protect against, for example, faults there, it's very, very essential. Of course, we need to tackle this piece by piece, probably, since, yeah, this could be a bit different techniques which has to be used to protect one versus the other. Speaking about ciphers, symmetric ciphers, they are by more easily mathematical described, and then somehow more easily in mathematics or algorithmic level protected. Not always is the case in general. Okay. Yeah, that's I think wanted to say on this topic.
Thank you, Vinci.
Yeah,
Miroslav, this is Apostle Vasilev with NIST. May I make a quick comment here related to the discussion so far, just to make sure that everybody is on the same page?
Sure. Go ahead.
So, okay, I totally agree with all of you that when we're looking at security, we have to look at it holistically and understand what are the assets and how can we protect them to make sure that we defend the right assets and use the right techniques. But that's out of scope for what we're doing here with this standardization effort. For example, you all talk about firmware integrity and firmware authenticity, and these are valid questions. But NIST does not define any of these things, how they should be implemented in the industry and in your product lines to make sure that you provide security and value to your customers. What we do, we standardize the algorithms that you use as primitives in implementing these use cases of protecting against firmware compromise and so on. And so I'd like to put back our discussion on focus of thinking about primitives. We talked about focus areas for standardization of threshold cryptography, and we identified symmetric block ciphers as the first candidate to try. And so we can think of an abstract model and say, okay, what is our security model here? What is it that we're going to protect? And let's assume that this is the block cipher with the key loaded in it and performing rounds of encryption or decryption on a block of data. That is the model. We don't want to consider what products it might be used into and how and so on. We're saying, okay, assuming that that is the model that we have, that's the gadget that we have, we can discuss how far we can take the model and the problem is specified correctly. Do we take the key already preloaded in order to defend against side channel leakage, or do we take the raw key and then secret share it and distribute it to the shares? That's a subject to discussion. But I'd like very much to focus our attention on the primitives alone and not talk about the general security problem about products and stuff like that. Not because it is not valid, but because it is out of scope for what we're trying to do here.
Okay, fair enough. So thanks. I mean, certainly, I just wanted to say here we are really discussing gadgets, and most of them listed here will be definitely used in block ciphers. You know, one other thing is that block cipher is an algorithm described. Once it becomes an implementation, we go beyond, and there's some control logic involved. And you know, if I can fault an AES such that it always executes a single AES round and not 10 of them, I'm also, you know, as an attacker successful. So should we then be looking into protecting, you know, those primitives? Should they be extended beyond the round of the block cipher? And maybe we should also look into the control logic. And what else should we do there? I mean, if we only focus on the block ciphers, as you said. But here we just wanted to kind of, this is the very first question to bring the high level picture, and then moving forward, we will focus more on the block ciphers. Yes.
May I bring in another comment as well related to gadgets? This
Sure.
is Luis. With respect to the kind of the language that we've put forward, namely in the recent NIST-IR, we use the term gadgets not only to possibly indicate some of the examples here in this slide, like small components of a circuit, but also the components that would be part of a threshold scheme, whose goal would be to implement a primitive. And so in that sense, we would also call gadgets to things like secret sharing as an algorithm, in case that may be a component that can be reused across a wide range of different threshold approaches or threshold schemes. Even the aspect of randomness, for example, if we consider that, let's say, distributed randomness would be a component useful to obtain some threshold property in an implementation of AES, then we could also call distributed randomness a gadget on its own. So essentially, we intend to cover components that, once well-defined and understood, they can be used modularly to construct threshold schemes that enable us to implement a particular primitive, such as AES. Yep, so that's the comment. Basically, just kind of to widen the scope of gadgets to not only subcomponents of a circuit, but components that can be used within a threshold scheme.
Okay, thanks so much. Yeah, these are meant to be shared by default here, obviously. So good. So I think we can move to the next section. Maybe one that's going to be appreciated by a broader audience is a discussion about the adversary. So here, I think, again, is when we look at the system, and even in this particular case, we can, you know, very much focus to the block ciphers, and the when we are designing countermeasures, we have to understand what adversaries that we are protecting against. So what is the motivation they have? You know, are they going to publish a research paper, or are they going to make some, you know, monetary, do they have some monetary things in mind, or are they doing this espionage, or are they, what budget they have, what knowledge they have, and also what time they have to mount these attacks. And then another one interesting brought up yesterday also by Simon is the remote versus local attacks, right? So how are we attacking this device through the network interface? Are we just trying to kind of hack its software by running some raw code? are we doing timing or cache attack on the device, or we are using kind of on-chip power management unit to mount side channel attack or FA? Are we passive or active attacker? So if we are passive, how passive are we? Are we doing univariate or multivariate attacks? Are we allowed to use templates and machine learning, and how many traces can we collect? So if you're active attacker, then basically what do we do, right? What kind of methods do we use? Do we only use cheap boards which we can buy online, like chip shouter, and inject glitches using power supply, or we can do something more advanced like electromagnetic fault injection, which is also kind of readily available today. Are we doing laser, which is then of course much more expensive? So what kind of faults are we injecting, how many? And then another point of discussion was depending on the application, right, and the market essentially. So what is this adversary doing? Who is he or she targeting? Government application or some IoT products? And then how well is the adversary model understood versus reality? So what we have basically really happening in reality. So these are some of the questions, and I think yeah, the essential question is like, how do we appropriately choose the adversary when we design our countermeasures?
Okay, if we speak in the focus of the standardization activity now, as far as I understand, the focus is only on side channel attack alone, meaning local physical attack, and fault attack, regardless how in fact it is triggered, whether it's a glitch, laser, or whatever. However, there, of course, mostly it's physical local attack, although this can be done remotely. Probably this is not of important feature at the moment. So what I want to say is that as a matter of countermeasures, one have to assume that for side channel attacker can, of course, collect the traces for execution, while for fault attacks, that's what I was also yesterday trying to say, is that there is a big variety of scenarios, of precisions, of timing, of yeah, many different ways to introduce faults, and that's what makes countermeasure very complex. And that's why probably there are so many ways to counter on a algorithmic level this kind of attacks. And yeah, this is part of the complexity for coming with kind of unified theory how to protect against fault attacks, and of course inherently combined attacks afterwards. So maybe it's simpler to, at least to speak for the moment, for side channel attacks, which is somehow easier to tackle, but at least something which I believe most of us already well understood from theory and practical point of view. And then the question is mostly about how much time attacker can afford himself to collect measurements, whether he's in control to make templates and things like that.
Yeah,
So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we should have different targets. Because at the end, it's clear that there are different applications Like for example, the security of I don't know, bank, a chip for the bank or a peacemaker is different than the security for an IoT camera. And if we shoot for, let's say, a very high level, the risk is that at the end we will not do anything for the low-end devices, which would be a pity in my opinion, because I think we should also implement protections on low-end devices. So, and honestly, the target, so the different levels will probably translate in different capabilities for the attacker. Now, how to then set the levels, this is difficult. As Benzi was saying, we could think about something, some attacker that is only passive, and, or let's say, just measuring on the number of traces, something like that, or on the time. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, can I interrupt?
Sure.
Please.
The point I think is that we can make categories given the equipment that we are considering. So if the equipment is it can be attacked remotely or not. Also some capabilities of the attacker, passive or active. But then for like the capabilities of the attacker given its computational power, for instance, it's really nicely handled by the side channel countermeasures, in my opinion, because we just have to increase the security order. For the fault attacks, it can be the same because we can consider that there are many faults in parallel or not. And some countermeasures, they allow to specify this level of security. So for everything related to computational power, if we consider, for instance, government or researchers that want to make a proof of concept, then we have these different security levels, and we can consider the same kind of countermeasures. And then I think the categories are more on is the equipment remotely accessible, or do we have a laser, or do we have an oscillator? And yeah, that's it.
If possible, I'd like to comment on the multivariate thing, which was mentioned in Vinci's talks yesterday. In my opinion, it's very risky to limit the attacks to univariate ones, because the fact that you go multivariate, it's something under the adversary's control. It's not forced by the design. And I would say, especially in software, you have all the information available. So in the end, if you want, first, if you can do these multivariate attacks, the power of these attacks compared to the power of a univariate attacks when it comes to masking, it's going to increase, the gap is going to increase exponentially with the security order. And second, I mean, the question is then how complex is it to do the profiling? And that's more the question of how much the adversary knows about the device. If you have access to the device, open samples, key, plain text, and ideally randomness, I don't think the profiling phase that you need to attack is so expensive. So I would typically argue that you can limit the number of data that the adversary can collect, the time that he's spending on mounting the attack, exclude all the rest from the evaluation and see how far he goes in terms of recovering the number of traces, and not say anything about the type of strategy he has to use to recover the key.
I pretty much agree with FX on that point. And just to comment on the equipment cost, I believe equipment cost is not really the issue. A lot of equipment is available for hire or is already available at a university lab. Not for every attack you're going to buy a completely new bench, but what is very difficult to get is actual experienced attackers who know how to use that equipment to its maximum to build a really powerful attack. So that identifying an attack vector in a device, the amount of time and experience needed there is really crucial. And if you have to first put up a suitable triggering mechanism on a complex device, which Jesse touched upon in his talk today, that is going to take time. There's no inherent no inherent mechanism to stop that from happening, but it's going to take time and expertise. That expertise is difficult to come by.
May I give a comment here, Miro? Okay. Yeah, may I?
Sure, Amir.
What I'm concerned about, honestly, is that first of all, we are considering the adversary model, or we're discussing about the adversary model. I think we need to get some feedback from either the certification bodies, which kind of adversary models are considered when the devices are supposed to be evaluated, and particularly from the industry partners. I mean, you guys in the panel, I mean, all of you from the industry, you should tell us which kind of adversary models you consider when you design your products. I mean, of course, I consider the sensitive information and also the things that you cannot reveal. I mean, the secrets of the company and the products and so on. I mean, I completely understand this, but I mean, in theory and also in academia, we may consider fancy adversary models, either estimating or overestimating or underestimating the adversaries. This is what we would like to have some feedback from the industry. This is one fact that I would like to know about. I mean, to have the feedback from the industry as well as the certification bodies. I mean, NIST can also provide some such information or such feedbacks. And also, I think we should mainly focus on, as was also mentioned by NIST, on the primitives. I mean, considering general schemes to prevent attacks, like let's say hiding the leakage somewhere by just randomizing over the time or something that is not relevant to any particular algorithm. I think it's not the focus that what we want to do here. Would be better to focus on the primitives, that supposing that everything is balanced, everything is synchronized, and then without having such effects, whether the attacker can still proceed with performing any successful attack or not, based on the primitive, or what we should do in the algorithm level. I mean, not at the logic level, not at the, let's say, system level, mainly on the primitive itself. This is, I think, what we would like to do in future. I mean, focusing on particular algorithm and then providing the algorithm level countermeasures, not necessarily system level, not necessarily gate level or transistor level, and so on. Yeah, that was the comment.
Thank you, Amir. So maybe I can just add to your question. When we do the certification in common criteria, right there we have well-defined rules. Every attacker is given specific equipment, tools, methods, budget, and so on. And then what is really being measured is the time it takes for them to kind of break a specific circuit. Of course, you can take into account availability of open samples and so on. But I think CC is very specific to smart cards and specific applications. And now when you speak here about maybe 140-3 or FIPS 140-3 and what we would like to see in future, this is not entirely clear to me. I mean, and specifically, maybe this is also a question back to NIST. If anyone here would, how would you guys like to see adversary being defined, and when we do the, let's say, CMVP or CAVP in future? So what sort of adversary should we assume? And again, depending on the application, I guess, if you speak about FIPS, it's going to be government, but if we are just making an IoT product and we still want to have it certified, what happens then, right?
Well, Thank you, Mira. I can try to answer some of these questions. And so when we're looking at the adversary and the capability of that adversary, we try to come up with two models, as it was articulated in our presentation: the passive and the active, and the combined model in particular. But it seems from the discussion yesterday and today that maybe we've reached a little too far, in the sense that when we're talking about fault injection and resilience against fault injection, what I gather from the industry is that you guys use a lot of proprietary techniques to defend against those things in your product lines. So it isn't clear to me that all the theoretical models that were presented yesterday will be of any use to your companies if you're not going to say that, well, those techniques that these models offer are better than what you have were using as proprietary tools. So when we're not interested in putting standards out that nobody's going to use because they don't think that they're useful, or they think that they have something better on their own, and things like this. Now, going back to the question about, well, how can you define your security problem like Common Criteria does, and what can we do in FIPS? I understand the flexibility that Common Criteria provides in defining exactly the type of problem you're trying to solve and showing with your solution that you've solved that particular problem. But that's not the model that NIST is interested in. We're interested in conformance testing, meaning that we identify a set of useful problems that we are trying to solve and devise a testing methodology that establishes that those particular problems are addressed. They're not necessarily the most difficult problems that Common Criteria may try to tackle. However, we think that if we identify a baseline set of security problems that we're going to solve, this may benefit a wider application set. We all talk about IoT and how unprotected most of these devices are and things like this. So if we come up with something that's reasonable and useful, maybe we have some shot at addressing some of these glaring security problems that exist out there today.
Thank you, Apostle. Yes, actually, you know, when you speak about FIPS 140-2 or upcoming -3, there are also different levels from what I understand, level 1 to level 4, and I guess you know, aiming at higher level means also adding more countermeasures, in which, you know, implicitly means protecting against a more capable adversary. That's how I would interpret it. But that it's not like, you know, very clearly laid out, at least. So that therefore the question, and see, I mean, I would like at least to understand from the industry point of view how best we can define the adversary from the NIST/FIPS point of view. Any other comments on this topic?
Okay, since there was a question to me or remark to me about univariate versus multivariate attacks, I somehow think you didn't get my message. I think I didn't insist that we need to care only for univariate attacks. What I was trying to bring as a message is that one should care first for them. And as illustrated in the examples I gave yesterday, somehow higher order univariate attacks was more successful to reveal the secret compared to lower order multivariate attacks. And this is a practical scenario where somebody just collects a number of traces and then attacks regardless of the order, as long as it works. And this is what I was trying to say. I'm not certainly insisting that one should care only for univariate and not bother about multivariate. Okay, I hope this is clear now.
Okay, but then you mean like, then you agree the goal is to take the best attack anyway?
Of course,
and the computational cost. What I was just saying is somewhere in the slides, you say the computational cost of multivariate attacks can be big, but
no, it is not taken into account. I mean, it was not clear from the statement from the papers whether it differs or not. We always assume it's kind of the same. Okay, maybe it's a small delta post, but it doesn't matter in practice. But it was not taken into account. The pictures were showing only the number of traces. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, but I think it's technical, but the pictures that you showed precisely, they were only aimed to connect some flow in the probing model to practice and show that sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It was not aimed to quantify the security precisely, like not qualitatively, but quantitatively.
Yeah, okay. I was kind of fast finding some pictures which serve the purpose of showing the difference between DEPO's first order univariate versus multivariate d-order attack. Probably this is not the best examples, but one of the few public sources I could find as well. Okay. Probably you can make a better quantitative analysis of that. Yeah, I'm not saying it's
sure, but what I was saying also is it remains that the difference between, like multivariate, if you give yourself an infinite amount of profiling, multivariate is always better. The only case where multivariate can be less good is because your profile is imperfect, and then the bad dimensions gives you additional noise. So since, and again, it depends a lot on what you give to the adversary. If you are in an open setting, when the adversary can find all the points of interest and efficiently profile, most of the times these multivariate attacks will work best. If you don't know the implementation details, and in particular the randomness to build your profile, the masking profiles, then it becomes much more difficult. And that's something important to clarify, especially in terms of how we evaluate, because I guess in evaluation labs nowadays, knowledge of randomness is not given, even knowledge of the implementation is not given. And one question is whether the NIST is in the same type of models, and we consider those adversaries, or we consider a more open adversary who can do very powerful and sometimes even unrealistic in practice things.
Okay, I think, let's say evaluation labs or the attacker should know the implementation. They should know how you generate randomness, what you use where. So it's more close to what I think you assume. What I just wanted to say is that you may, for example, in hardware software is probably not applicable this, to bring all these points which are kind of leaky in a single interval, such that the multivariate is harder to collect as multivariate, and you see it as univariate. Of course, this is very tricky and probably not always working. Yeah, I mean, it is maybe a small nuance that I do agree with you that univariate is weaker in general. As a attack scenario, multivariate, you have much more capabilities. But you still have, as a designer, maybe a choice to try to squeeze somehow.
Yeah, disagree. Whatever the designer does to limit the amount of samples available, that's perfectly good. I mean, that's a way to reduce the leakage.
Yes, so in a CC evaluation, I would agree that I expect the lab to have very extensive access to the code, both software and hardware, and to the documentation, maybe even too much access. Obviously they're operating on limited time, and you have to digest a lot of information during that limited time. And my observation from a broader picture is that in recent years, there have been very few successful side channel attacks on protected AES cores in the public. So I assume that the CC evaluation, at least as far as AES cores go, are fairly successful in identifying the major problems and making sure that the manufacturers solve those problems. What they're obviously less successful at is stamping out ECDSA nonce leakage, for example, because there have been an embarrassing amount of published attacks on devices. And also very interesting was the recent dismantling DST attack, where they used a template attack on key loading. The device seems to have had no protection, but at least that was one case where side channel attacks were used to break a commercially available device out there. So that was an interesting point on where the attack landscape is at the moment.
Okay, I don't know, sorry, I interrupted somebody. I don't know whether the credit should be fully to, let's say, certification labs, which test better now products such that we have less products which are kind of leaky IS implementation. Or it is also because of manufacturers start better protecting their copros, maybe using techniques like TI or something else. I think what also Apostle raised as a question is that if you think what was 10 years ago, for example, I could say that, okay, I'm betting now, let's say 90% of the products probably didn't use even sharing for protection against side channel attacks. I think nowadays this is quite widely used technique in one or another form. So I think the technology of sharing and masking had to go. I mean, it took time, of course, but nowadays it's wider use, I believe, in products, although this is kind of information which is not available. And this led to more secure implementations. And of course, this is a continuous process, so we discover new attacks as, for example, these glitches and how to deal with them, and then compositions and so on. So that's why certainly at some moment standardization of something which is a common use or acknowledged technology for protection, it's good to be in standard and mandated somehow as a baseline. And that's why I believe this kind of effort is useful. But yeah, that's...
Yes. Sorry, Sonia, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to add a comment to what Venti just said. I think the NIST was worried because there are several techniques used by several companies to protect their implementations, but actually we have some common techniques that are used by almost everybody. As well, like masking, for instance, for side channel countermeasures, if we are talking about hardware, threshold implementations as well. And some of these techniques are mature. Of course, we need to add some new techniques above that, like how to deal with composition, how to deal with stronger adversaries. But I think we have a strong basis at first to be standardized.
Oh, this is great. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Venti. This is Apostle speaking here again. So let's phrase the question differently then. Can we define a meaningful security problem that we could solve with the help of threshold cryptography on a single chip and prove that the problem is solved using a simple test? I use simple in quotes here. We need to define what simple is, but the test should be sort of objective and should generate test evidence that can be verified objectively. Is that a reasonable way to present the problem we want to solve with this standardization effort?
I think the simplest case really the side channel case, not the combined attacks case. Although simplicity there, it's not maybe so simple, but certainly there is a baseline, of course, as Sonia said, of people using some techniques for protection in that situation. What may differ from implementation or company to company is the additional tweaks for how you guarantee composition or other features, performance, or things like that, which probably it's harder to get unified. But I think the baseline is there and to be illustrated.
So I guess having a good, fair, simple test methodology, that would be really important for selecting one specific type of threshold countermeasure or another. I'm not yet convinced that this is really what is required. Obviously, the manufacturers have profited a lot from the public research, as Venci mentioned, and for researchers, it would of course be nice if they got more credit for the technologies used by manufacturers. But unfortunately, semiconductor devices rarely come with a comprehensive list of references for technologies used. And it's not necessarily a straightforward adoption to take this research paper and turn it into a chip. But semiconductor manufacturers have definitely profited from the public research. So if NIST comes up with a good test procedure, that would really help address a problem.
Yeah, certainly agree with Simon on this point. It's very beneficial if chips come with this kind of construction that we can compare easily.
Well, I mean, we certainly, I certainly appreciate the difficulty in coming up with a proof that you are, let's say, side channel resistant, or your technology is side channel resistant. In my view, this sort of testing has always been somewhat of a boutique experience, right? Depending on how good your equipment is, how trained your tester is, and how good a luck they can have on a particular day, you get a specific result. Now, the beauty of the threshold approach, in one way of looking at it, is that okay, if you are able to partition your calculation in a set of tiles and you spread them far apart on a chip somehow, and you guarantee that there is no cross communication of some sort depending on the minimal distance, then in theory you could think of saying, okay, if I can enforce and ensure that my design is at least d microns apart from each other, the tiles are at least, then I have a sufficient amount of proof and assurance that I have met this requirement to be side channel resistance. And that way we can reduce a whole bunch of proprietary very subjective techniques into something that is conceivably measurable or easily established using the present set of tools that the industry is using to design and manufacture products. So that's really the way I saw the promise of threshold cryptography. The question is this a realistic view given the state of technology today? Is it too simplistic or unrealistic? I'd like to hear you guys speak to that.
Yeah, sorry, Apostle. So yeah, I agree. I think that actually what you are talking about is what we refer to as leakage models. So François-Xavier talked about them yesterday. The point is to reduce to some unified models. We assume that the underlying device is made that it leaks in some way, which is defined by the leakage models. For instance, the manipulated data in threshold implementations are well separated, as you said. So we have such models that are well known and well deployed in the literature, and it's always important to come with new verification techniques and new countermeasures because they don't rely on a specific equipment. Of course, in the companies, you can always prove that your design is working well with your specific equipment, but it won't help the other people around. So relying on concrete leakage models that are shared by the community is somehow a good way to proceed in my point of view, because we unify everything. We assume that some device shares some particularities and we can build common countermeasures above.
It's that separation is certainly a interesting technology, and masking or secret sharing in general is a very important countermeasure. But even if you have the separate tiles on the chip, they're still on the same power grid. And if you don't put them on the same power grid, the adversary can measure on multiple pins or combine the power consumption of multiple pins into a single pin outside the chip. So at that point, your separation disappears again. And again, you have the information of all the tiles in your power trace. And that is where the models, the more theoretic models, which are definitely helpful, but they're not solving the full problem in practice. In practice, you have to go a step further and look at the full device, and you cannot rely on a simple formal verification proof in itself. You will have to stop measuring at some point.
Yeah, I do.
That's
Simon, on
yes,
sorry.
There's no contradiction between your two views, right? I think what we are saying from the theory viewpoint is theory helps until a certain point. And the good thing, essentially, if you don't use any formal method and so on, it's all down to your, like the end of the analysis that is more heuristic. So it's more difficult for the designer. The goal of all these theoretical models is to state precise assumptions and say, okay, if you guarantee these assumptions that hopefully are a little bit simpler to guarantee, then the rest is managed by the proof. So the only thing that we can do with theoretical models is to remove a little bit of the complexity of analyzing all these problems and designing secure gadgets. And probably in that way, it can be helpful, right? You can have things quite abstract up to a certain point and say, okay, these abstract gadgets, they are secure in the models, and then there remains for the model to make sense in practice for you implementers to guarantee like the security order, like what you said with the recombinations, and to guarantee a large enough noise. But that's probably something simpler to achieve for companies than just starting from scratch. And there's some common understanding that can be leveraged.
Okay.
Yes, I think this was actually just to bring us to the next section, but I wanted to check with Svetla if we have enough time, because I think we're over time, but we still have like half an hour. Maybe we can keep.
Okay. I do wanted to say that I agree with the point FX mentioned, that using the models and the techniques developed by academia reduce a lot of the complexity for making a secure implementation and protection. And also to certain, I mean, Simon's point is also valid that indeed you still have to do additional work in order to make a complete protection. But of course, this reduction already helps you to speed up or make it better. And probably this is valuable from standardization point of view, at least to decrease the complexity or to reduce the risk of getting something wrong. Still, yeah, there is still other things which eventually has to be checked for completeness, if necessary for higher order security, as I proposed initially, since that's why I wanted to have different levels. Some of them will suffice to check the model, and formally, of course, this gives some guarantees, not complete, and that's why for higher order, I was insisting to have yeah, the additional checks. But maybe this is too complex, understanding how FIPS view on this is to have different, so many different levels, in fact.
Yeah, so I mean, I can only add to that that basically, you know, we all know that security is all about layers. So even, I mean, models certainly are necessary, and we need to be able to prove that our countermeasures hold in a specific setting, some assumptions. In reality, I mean, we will often be adding more, not relying necessarily on a single countermeasure. And maybe some things to be considered here, just written down. I guess Venci yesterday was talking about the protection order. Eventually, should we be happy, you know, going to the D equals 4 or 8? Today, Sonia presented a work we saw. We go all the way to 127. So, like, what is the protection order we should be happy about? And then FX presented this very nice graph, right, where we see the number of traces we need to collect against the noise level, and essentially, you know, if I'm a designer, how do I choose? I mean, do I pick one curve and I say I will stay on this curve because, you know, I know what I get here in terms of area, performance, power, latency, and then I'll try to see how I can increase the noise level. I mean, maybe by some other means, or should I jump to the next curve, right, going up? And then we had also the discussions about limiting the Oracle queries. So how they're certainly helpful. I mean, are they limiting functionality in real life? Probably. For some keys, right, it's probably fine to limit queries. For some other keys, it's not possible. And then, of course, we have also comment from Venci that side channel countermeasures are well understood today. But then when it comes to FA, there is not so much done. Of course, that's changing as we speak. And again, as a designer, if I have to choose, what do I do? Do I say I'll just pick this side channel secure circuit and I'll double it and I'll make 2 cores running multiple times and I achieve both spatial and temporal redundancy? And then what sort of attacks do I really cover with this? Because Jesse talked about DFA today. And then, of course, there is also this very powerful CIFA, right, statistical ineffective fault attacks, where kind of detection would not be helpful at all. So we would have to do something else. There is recent work on the combined countermeasures, right, exactly taking this approach of threshold implementation using tags, etc. There are sensors, right? We also have analog sensors. Somebody was asking earlier today, efficiency of analog sensors versus algorithm countermeasures. Again, why not having both or multiple? And then Sonia presented the tools for automated countermeasure insertion. So what can we do there? Basically, can we develop more? And one last point was latency. I think brought by Simon, I think in the chat, is indeed a big kind of challenge today, right? So how do we define, let's say, one one clock cycle block cipher encryption masked or protected against FA? Is that possible even, right? So those are some open questions, and we'll be happy to hear your feedback on this.
Well, Miro, if I may, to answer Vency's questions on the levels, we are certainly open to multiple levels, and obviously we can't really have infinite number of levels, but so long as we solve a meaningful security problem at each level that we can actually verify objectively and reliably. And by that I mean we don't want to turn FIPS 140 conformance testing into common criteria testing. That's not where we want to go.
Okay, that's clear message. Thanks. Okay, nobody wants to pick the topic apparently.
Go ahead, Vency, sure.
I think choosing the right security level versus area performance, power, and so on, which are not security criteria, but they are very important when you design a product, because that's what actually your product manager asks you to fit in. Otherwise, whatever protection you provide will be not used in this product. It's a very complex kind of scenario where you, as a designer, has to choose everything correct and optimize to the last bit in order to fit all requirements. And naturally, the design process, it happens sometimes that you have to sacrifice one or the other things. Not always security, but area, for example, or performance. So it's always a difficult discussion which is right and which is not. And then you always need to keep in mind to what protection you are targeting. Let's say you have a target to protect against, I don't know, 10 million traces. And the problem usually is that when you design your chip, you don't know what will be the rest of the chip eventually, and your noise level. So you cannot easily translate these 10 million into an order of protection, such that I choose first order, second order, third order, whatsoever order. So it's a bit difficult to use the curve FX pointed. And this makes the life of a designer or implementation more tricky. Yeah, it's a bit of guessing at that time. What will be the right thing to do? And it has a lot of implications. The security order you choose impacts everything, area, performance, and so on. So what I wanted to say is that from designer point of view, there's quite a number of challenges. Although the theory is kind of clear, yeah, he still has to a bit of guesswork there. Okay, I was trying to explain the complexity of choosing. It's not theoretical problem, of course, maybe.
Thanks, Vency. Anyone else?
Vency said everything that needs to be said from my perspective on that topic.
Good. No,
Yeah,
perfect. Sorry.
No, I was just saying that there are a lot of criteria, so it's hard to say much about it. Exactly, we need to choose what is maybe, what are maybe the good limitations for an adversary, and focus on that too. to have concrete countermeasures.
I agree. It's tough one. I mean, it's really all about the recommendation. So, and what needs to be taken into account. And I think it always needs to be linked back to the adversary, right? So who is that we are protecting against? All right. So then I'll move to the next one, which is, I think it has been also mentioned briefly during this previous discussion. So basically, you know, how do we validate, and what sort of certification are we aiming at? And I think here I was at least trying to kind of break this problem into two, and one so-called pre-silicon, and where we mostly focus on validation. If say we have an architectural specification, and then this is then compiled into a specific code. How do we verify this? What kind of tools we use for later on for synthesis? These are important issues, I think, because no matter how much we all appreciate security and we would like to this to be the number one area power performance, this is what all these design tools, if you look at Cadence or Synopsys, all the commercial tools we use today for building circuits are really all optimized for area power and performance. Security is not taken into account. So how do we deal with this? And then again, when we validate, how do we do that? What kind of metrics we take into account? Again, all linked to what we discussed, leakage model, attack order. And one interesting point I think was brought up yesterday. This is like detection versus exploitation, right? So sometimes should we be really looking at leakage detection like TVLA, or if we find an issue and detect some leakage, should we always be going and trying to exploit it? Like what approach do we take there? And again, what number of traces and faults we should be injecting into this pre-silicon evaluation? What the issue is always simulation time, so we are limited to the computational cluster we have. And then the second part of this equation is post-silicon validation and certification. So NIST presented yesterday, they would also like to have automated CAVP. Then when we talk about CMVP and how we can bring this new NIST-IR 8214A into the FIPS 140-203, what other certification we have to keep in mind? Is it CCE? Is it CCIP? What about ARM? And what sort of levels do you choose? Because each of these certification bodies has different levels, right? I mean, no matter what you pick, you will get like at least 4 or 5 different, 6 maybe different levels. So yeah, with that, I think any further comments, please go ahead.
So if no one else picks up the ball, pre-silicon validation, I believe, is a very interesting topic. A lot still needs to be done. A lot can be improved, but that's the best point to catch problems. If we have to get to silicon first to identify a problem, that's going to be expensive. So anything that can be corrected pre-silicon is really important. And it's not directly to AES related, but in formal verification, I see a big gap between software or software testing and hardware testing. And I'm not sure that the hardware models used in software testing are accurate enough, but the entire area, in my experience, has just started to develop. The first tools are there, the first measurements for a few devices, for a few prototypes are there, but how that's really going to translate into a robust methodology that anyone can use, where I believe we still have quite a big step to do. Someone else mentioned that NIST should work with the tools manufacturers to improve on that aspect. And yes, I don't think we've reached quite the technological maturity where the tools manufacturers really can do a lot on a generic level, but there's definitely work that will have to be done in the not too far future, I hope. Post-silicon, anything that can bring down the cost without compromising on the comprehensiveness of the test, without creating false positive or false negative problems, is to be appreciated. And I don't think that leakage detection testing is fully understood to the level where we can easily deploy it at the moment, but it's definitely pointing in the right direction, I would say.
Well, if I may add a comment here, we're not really limiting ourselves to the post-silicon validation model. We'll be interested in working with the pre-silicon if that would provide value to the industry. Certainly, I think maybe the types of tests you could do on the pre-silicon testing would be more amenable to being objective set of tests performed with tools and expressed in terms of parameters and values compared to the post-silicon testing that is typically done for side channel analysis. And so there is no reason to think that when we're talking about automation testing or automated testing, we're really limiting ourselves to the post-silicon phase. And when I speak about automation and automated test, it doesn't mean that everything has to be done in an automated fashion. But what we are after is having a representative set of tests that one can perform and show the results of, and record those and report them to us. That way, when we send some auditor later on to verify that these results are real, they don't have to think about what specific tests this company designed and are these tests meaningful to show compliance or to show that they're protecting against the security problem they were talking about. So we want to reduce or transform the problem into something that is easily verifiable and reportable with a well-understood set of tests.
Okay, I think it's a good kind of news that you consider also pre-silicon as part of eventual certification and validation, since, as Simon said, yeah, it saves a lot of effort, and especially this kind of verification tools are very helpful to discover early problems and fix them on time with least efforts. The problem usually there, or the complexity, come from simulation times or similar computational resources, but nowadays this is a kind of solvable problem. So yeah, this is certainly helpful for end product certification, if it of course is taken into account in the steps of granting the certification or speeding up.
All right, thank you guys. Anyone else on this topic from the whole audience, maybe?
Yeah, so I would just like to add that I've had some experience with these simulation times and trying to use the commercial tools to do these evaluations pre-silicon. And I believe that, as Venci says, the problem is not in the computational power. By no means, it can be done. So the better focus would be trying to look at these sort of layout effects and backend things that are happening that can maybe capture these additional things that cannot be captured by the mathematical models. So yeah.
So making simulation models more realistic, basically, right?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. So I think, given the time, Svetlana, I think we are just running out of time, right? So maybe we can stop here. I will, if you allow me, just mention this last one is a kind of candy. I probably we won't have time to discuss it today, but maybe tomorrow, if anyone is interested. There's always this question of randomness and the quality of randomness we need to use for masking or building these gadgets, securing them. How do we do that? It will be interesting to hear. Do we have to go and follow SP 800-90A and B? I mean, if you're not familiar with this notation, it's simply saying FIPS compliant deterministic random number generator, which is like AES counter mode based or SHA, and then dash 90B will be the kind of true entropy source. So very strong construction can be used for deriving crypto keys. Should we always go that way, or should we just use a simple counter? I mean, obviously not, but just there as a small example. And then also, is an RNG cost a real issue or not? So because I've been observing things in literature of people paying a lot of attention on the number of randomness being produced using this as an input for designing countermeasures. Is this really costly compared to the rest of the logic and the rest of the microcontroller die size or not? These sort of things. But again, probably we won't be touching this today, so we may bring it in tomorrow in the panel discussion. So Svetlana, back to you.
Yes, thanks a lot for the very interesting discussion. If any other final points, we have 1 minute till 5. If not, I would like to thank everybody who was participating in this meeting today. And we have 1 more day to go tomorrow at the same time, again with 2 presentations and a final panel. Tomorrow the presentations will be focused on verification tools. Also very interesting to see how the process of validation can be done. So if no more questions, we can close the meeting. And thanks again to everybody.
Big thank you from my side as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Miro. Thank you, Svetlana, and thanks to the rest of the panelists.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.